Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Atlanta Council. I'm Steve Grunman, a senior fellow here in the Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, and I'm the producer of this Defense Industrial Policy series. Thanks a lot for joining us here in this virtual event over the Council's secure Zoom platform. The purpose of this event, I'm sure you know because you've tuned in, is to hear from General Charles Hooper, the Director of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency. General Hooper, thank you very, very much for joining us. He's going to give us an address entitled Security Through Global Partnerships. And then he and I will have a little discussion, maybe a long discussion actually, just but one-on-one over the course of about 20 or 30 minutes after his address, following which we will field and deliver to the General some questions from those of you in the audience. The way to render those questions is by using the Q&A function at the bottom of this screen here, not the chat function, I'll reiterate, but the Q&A function. My friend, colleague, and Atlanta Council member Byron Callan, Managing Director for Defense Studies at Capital Alpha Partners, Byron will be fielding those questions, and then at about 11:30, when we want to direct some of them to General Hooper, Byron will come on the screen and manage the Q&A, if you will. So one more time, if you have questions, whenever they may occur to you, feel free to deposit them in that Q&A box there at the bottom. Alternatively, we are live tweeting, as the case may be called, over the Twitter platform using the hashtag ACDefense, Alpha Charlie Defense, and so you can both. I'd even encourage you to have a conversation of some kind over the Twitter feed, but also that's a platform through which you can pose questions that also will come to Byron's attention for his consideration when we get to that part of the program. Today's event, I would want you all to know, is the 17th in this Atlanta Council Defense Industrial Policy series. This series is an initiative that makes a preeminent platform available to public officials and others who can address government stewardship of defense industrial resources. Previous speakers in this series have included the acquisition executives of all the U.S. military departments, as well as the Special Operations Command, former now Secretary of the Air Force Deborah James, Secretary of the Army Mark Esper when he was Secretary of the Army, and just last year, almost a year ago, this month, the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, Ellen Lord, was here and used this preeminent platform, as I like to call it immodestly, to talk about the advent of 5G telecommunications technology and its significance for national security. Today, right in the trend of those distinguished speakers and of the range of themes that they're discussing, we're going to have the opportunity to hear from and talk to General Hooper, the steward of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency. The United States is, as we like to say here at the Atlanta Council, stronger with allies. And in a renewed era of great power competition, the Pentagon has identified this imperative, strengthening alliances and attracting new partners, as one of the pillars of its 2018 National Defense Strategy. Defense security cooperation plays a significant, important role in the implementation of that tenet of the strategy. Moreover, and as the General will talk about, it is far more than foreign military sales. The aspect of DSCA's mandate, for which those of you in industry, which might be a preponderance of our audience today, might best know DSCA, but it's far more than that. We're going to talk about the full range of those missions, which include, among other things, training, advising, and equipping foreign partners, as well as even rendering humanitarian and disaster relief. We'll talk about that, particularly in the context of the COVID crisis that we and the whole of the world is, of course, now grappling with. Not least, however, defense security cooperation is often undertaken in coordination with industrial partners, and therefore regarded, at least I regard it, as an important instrument of defense industrial policy. Thus, my placement of this conversation in this series, the Defense Industrial Policy series. A couple more notes of substance before we proceed. A couple more notes of administration before we proceed to the substance. First, let me make clear that this event is public on the record, not only as we deliver it live, but also as it remains available both over the Atlanta Council's website and perhaps as these things tend to migrate over onto YouTube. The consequence of that for General Hooper, he's well aware of. The consequence of that for those of you watching is that if you submit a question, please identify yourself and your affiliation with the question. Otherwise, however great the question, it will not be admissible, as they say in court. I've covered the other administrative matters which have to do with how to get a question forward. So all of those points having been said, I am now pleased to introduce Barry Pavel, who will say a few more words about the council, about Scowcroft Center and its mission, and then make a proper introduction of General Hooper. Barry is a senior vice president and director of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. Prior to joining the council, he was a career member of the senior executive service in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, where he served for almost 18 years. He culminated his civil service career from October 2008 until July 2010 at the White House, where he was special assistant to the president and senior director for defense policy and strategy at the National Security Council. Barry, I am very grateful for your taking time to participate in this event, and I turn the microphone over to you.
Thanks, Steve, and I got that virtual microphone. Thanks, everyone. I'll try to be very brief. We really want to hear from the general on a lot of the pressing issues of the day. Here at the Scowcroft Center at the Atlanta Council, we focus on practical solutions for countering the security challenges of today and tomorrow. And that's never been more true than a lot of the work we're doing now. In honor of our namesake, General Brent Scowcroft's legendary career of public service, our mission is to develop nonpartisan strategies to address security challenges facing the United States and the world, and to do so most effectively by helping the U.S. work extremely closely with U.S. allies and partners. Accordingly, the Scowcroft Center has been building out our defense work in this era while also urgently assessing the geopolitical implications of the strategic shock that is the COVID-19 pandemic, and having a lot of convenings with U.S. government officials and allied officials. For example, a couple of weeks ago, we convened around our new series of strategy papers, Shaping the Post-COVID-19 World Together. And the first installment, which I strongly commend, by Dr. Matt Burrows, who used to work in the intelligence community, is called What World After COVID-19, and posits 3 scenarios for the post-pandemic world order. We also held a very interesting event that I'd commend with prominent author Max Brooks. And the subject of that was defense, survival, and fiction in the era of COVID-19. And we certainly expect this event to be one of the many highlights as well. This is an excellent platform, this Defense Industrial Policy Series, for exploring defense issues at the interface of government and industry and for furthering cooperation with allies. As Steve noted, we have a strong belief in working extremely closely with allies. The only way to effectively counter great power adversaries in this era of extreme geopolitical uncertainty. And since security cooperation is a primary tool for ensuring interoperability with our allies, this is a great event. And so our excellent speaker with us here today is Lieutenant General Charles Hooper. He's the director of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency. This month marks his 40th year of service as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army. That is incredible. In addition to the political military assignments that have figured prominently in his record of service over the past 2 decades in particular, General Hooper also has served in command and staff assignments in the U.S. Army Armor Center, the 25th ID, the 82nd Airborne Division, the Army Recruiting Command. He is the Army's most senior foreign area officer, having 16 years of experience in security cooperation and in serving as an attaché. Most notably among these assignments is his service as the senior U.S. defense official and attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, as the J5 at U.S. Africa Command, and the Deputy Director of Strategic Planning and Policy at U.S. Pacific Command, and as Chief of the Army International Affairs Division on the Army staff. Finally, but very interestingly for me, certainly, General Hooper is regarded as one of the Pentagon's most accomplished and knowledgeable experts on China. He served 2 assignments at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, first as the Assistant Army Attaché and later as U.S. Defense Attaché. And he's also been the Senior Country Director for China, Taiwan, and Mongolia policy in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So General Hooper speaks Mandarin Chinese, as you might expect from that background, and we'll take any questions in Mandarin on Twitter as well. General Hooper, we greatly look forward to your remarks. Once again, thanks to all of you for being with us. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And now over to you, General Hooper. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Barry, and thank you, Steve, for hosting this session. I'm honored to be here to speak to the Atlantic Council. It's good to see Steve again. Steve and I are grad school classmates. So it's always good to see him. Barry and I were just talking about the fact that our paths likely crossed in my previous tours in OSD policy. So it is indeed a small world, and we are indeed old, as Barry pointed out. I want to start out by hoping that everyone that's listening today is safe and healthy. That's the most important thing during these difficult times. And I'm very honored that we're using and finally leveraging this technology to stay connected with each other and to have a dialogue. I'm going to talk to you about American approach to security cooperation. And that approach is predicated on the principle that by strengthening the military capabilities of your allies and partners, you are by extension strengthening your own defense capabilities. We've seen ample evidence of the success of that, both in the North Atlantic Alliance, which exists to this day, formed after World War II, in the strengthening and rebuilding of our current allies in the Asia Pacific region. And we've seen how our approach has been successful and how it differs from the other, historically and currently, from the other great powers and strategic competitors. This is a transformational time in U.S. security cooperation. Security cooperation for the United States has always been important, but I have never seen a time in all my time practicing when there's been better strategic alignment across the government. We have the 2017 National Defense Authorization. I've seen security cooperation go from, quite frankly, an afterthought or a secondary tool of policy to evolve into a policy tool of first resort. And the number 2 line of effort in the National Defense Strategy reinforces that. The strengthening alliances and attracting new partners is only one of 3 lines of effort in the National Defense Strategy. And as a result, I've seen my own posture as the director of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency go from riding in a center seat in economy class to traveling with the Secretary of Defense and we like to joke at the agency that we're the agency that does more, but is known by fewer people than any other agency in Washington. DSCA leads a security cooperation community of more than 20,000 people worldwide that's responsible for the oversight, management, and execution of all security cooperations activities. And Steve talked about the fact that we are most closely associated with foreign military sales, but we do a lot more than that. And we do it because of the unique approach the United States takes, this total package or full spectrum approach to building the capabilities of our allies and partners. And I hope we can talk about that later. But in addition to foreign military sales, we're also responsible for institutional capacity building, which is the essential complement to foreign military sales. We're responsible for international education and training, as well as humanitarian and disaster assistance. And And I hope we'll talk a little bit about that later as well. DSCA is guided by 4 core values that frame our approach to security cooperation and that uniquely American approach. And those 4 values are transparency, responsiveness, integrity, and commitment. And so very quick definitions: transparency in everything that we do. The United States is the only great power where the entire menu and procedure for procuring weapons and equipment is online and a matter of public domain and public record. Our responsiveness to the needs and requirements, the unique needs and requirements of our allies and partners, the fast responsiveness to it. The integrity of the U.S. approach to security cooperation, which is virtually incorruptible. And as I like to tell many of my interlocutors, counterparts, and defense ministers that I deal with, when you do business with the United States, the books are always open for inspection. And finally, the commitment to a long-term relationship, alliance, or partnership beyond the point of sale. And I think that that is one of the most unique characteristics of this very American approach to security cooperation. So how do we lead this large, very diverse community of stakeholders? First of all, we build strong partnerships both within the interagency between the State Department, the Commerce Department, the Congress, the National Security Council staff, the White House, and others, as well as building strong partnerships and relationships with our very strong relationship. We work with them to ensure a level playing field for competitions, individual companies for a level playing field. We work with them on trade shows, the Air Show and the Farnborough Air Show. We work with the industry associations, and we work with them one-on-one in company meetings. The next way we lead is by ensuring we have a fully trained and educated and professional workforce. And we were given a mandate by Congress and a direction by Congress in 2017 to establish a professional workforce. We have achieved that. We achieved it ahead of schedule by the establishment of the Defense Security Cooperation University, the first DoD university since 1991, the Defense Acquisition University, in addition to having established for the first time ever a civilian career field, GS career field for security cooperation, our workforce development program. And hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that later. Finally, many people talk about the reform of security cooperation, and we have aggressively attacked and addressed efforts to reform security cooperation. But we like to think that we're moving beyond reform. We like to think we're moving towards instilling a culture of continuous improvement within our security cooperation community, the objective of which is to accelerate foreign military sales, the timeline for foreign military sales, reduce the cost for our partners, and ensure an educated and professional security cooperation workforce. I talked a little bit about this before, but what distinguishes the United States from our strategic competitors, one of the things is this full spectrum capability approach. And what I mean by that is, it is not enough to provide your ally or your partner with simply hardware and weapons. Training, education, logistics, sustainment, all of these functions contribute towards allowing your ally or partner to develop a full and true and sustainable capability with the systems that you provide them. In addition to that, we place a great deal of emphasis on assessment, design, monitoring, and evaluation. Okay, and what that simply means is we are constantly assessing our tactics, techniques, procedures, and practices. And if they don't work, we do something else. It's just that simple. And we're always looking for ways to subjectively and objectively measure our effectiveness, the effectiveness of our programs. We placed a lot of emphasis recently on civilian harm mitigation, ensuring that that our weapons and the systems that we provide are used in a manner consistent with our values as a country, and ensuring that our partners have all that they need to use these weapons in ways that mitigate or reduce the probability of civilian harm or civilian injury. and always, always, always with an eye towards ensuring as best we can adherence to human rights and the rule of law. Make no mistake, we are in an era of renewed great power competition. Steve talked a little bit about this. And I am convinced that our values-based approach, number one, distinguishes the United States from our strategic competitors, and number two, will ensure that we are successful and victorious in this great power competition. I'm often reminded of something Secretary Esper has said on many occasions, and that is that forged over decades of shared sacrifice, the United States network of alliances and partnerships provides us an asymmetric strategic edge our adversaries cannot match. One of the things I say all the time is first of all, we will win this strategic competition because we have the best equipment in the world and we have the best approach in the world. But we're not going to win it by trying to out-Chinese the Chinese or out-Russian the Russians. We're going to win it by leveraging, as Secretary Esper has alluded to, those unique characteristics of our approach that set us above and apart from our strategic competitors. The future of security cooperation is interesting and complex and exciting. First of all, we're no longer focusing strictly on traditional alliances in the Westphalian sense of the word. In other words, nation states. We have to think along it's not that those lines don't remain important, but overarching those are the works that build, as we all know, information eminence of kinetics, mechanics, and metallurgy. That has defined our approach to defensive systems since caveman days, really. It was always about the best metal, the best mechanics, the metallurgy, and the best kinetics. We are moving into a realm where information, as we know, the realm of information warfare, where information will dictate whether or not a nation in control of that information, management of that information, will determine whether or not a country has a defensive or a military strategic edge. And we need to be mindful of that. And with that comes an emphasis on cyber. We must continue to find innovative ways to support the development of partner nation cyber operations capabilities, as well as our own, assessment, program plans, acquisition, training, monitoring, and evaluation. And this requires a bit of a different mindset than merely selling tanks, planes, ships, and guns. You have to start to think in a different framework when you're discussing the protection of information and the proliferation of technology. Finally, as I talked about these modern innovations and these future emerging trends, we cannot lose sight of the importance of relationships. And I tell people all the time that this is when you build alliances and partnerships, certainly they have a strategic framework, but at the end of the day, it comes down to human relationships. Those are what define the strength of an alliance. And I'll end with a quick story. When I was a young assistant attaché in Beijing, my next door neighbor was the assistant air attaché from the Embassy of Egypt. And our children were about the same age. Our embassies were next door to each other in Beijing. And so I got to know this gentleman very well. He had just transitioned from Russian MiG fighters to the F-16. I don't think there was anyone in the world prouder to be an F-16 pilot than my friend was. So we got to know each other over the course of our assignments. When our assignments concluded, he went his way and I went mine. 20 years later, I found myself as the defense attaché and the chief of military cooperation in Egypt. We had suspended our aid to Egypt as a result of some political developments in that country. And I found myself going to my first meeting with the chief of Egyptian Air Force procurement. website or some that meeting you get. Now, I'm not going to say that that relationship resulted in me getting everything that I wanted. It didn't. Equities as I was about mine. But the establishment of that relationship helped us to work through a number of very difficult issues that we were able to bring to fruition and helped really to rebuild as we emerge from the suspensions and move back to steady state. So those relationships are important. So I'd like to stop there, and I'd like to turn the floor back over to Steve, and let's have a nice, good discussion. I look forward to your questions. Over to you, Steve.
Okay, General Hoop, thank you very, very much. That is another perfect example of what I hope for here in this defense industrial policy series, connecting, as Barry alluded to, the intersection of defense ministries and industries at those places where their connections and collaboration and cooperation make all the difference to advancing the national security interest of ourselves and our partners. So although neither of us wants to be reminded of age, I think that was underscored at the outset. Nonetheless, I'm going to start our fireside chat here with the way I have come to start all of these, whether they be with chief executive officers, undersecretaries, or the directors of DSCA. That is what I guess I've come to learn in social media terms is your timeline. How and why and from where did you get into the Army? And then in particular, I'd be interested in that pivot, if I can call it that, which at some point in your career you made over to political military affairs. Who are you? Where'd you come from?
Well, thanks for the question.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. I have to start off with as what do they say? Start at the beginning. I'm a proud native. My family's originally from Brooklyn, New York, but I call the great sovereign state of New Jersey my home.
Right.
I am a Jersey boy, but I come from a family, Steve, of public servants. So my father was a New York City fireman. My uncles were New York City cops. And every uncle that wasn't a policeman or a fireman was a non-commissioned officer in the military. All of their wives and many of the women in my family and some of the men were teachers. My mother was a middle school teacher. So I come from a family of public servants and people who gave back not only in the course of their public lives and their occupations, but also were volunteers during the civil rights movement, were active in their churches. So I grew up seeing people constantly giving back to their country and the community. I went from there. It was not surprising. I wanted to go to West Point. I always wanted to go to West Point. It was my first choice. I wanted to be an Army officer and join that tradition of public service. And it was there. And I'll tell a story about how I got moved in the direction of political military affairs. And it's both inspirational and quite accidental. In those days, every West Point cadet had to take 2 years of language. And so when you finished your summer training as a freshman, we all stood in line and you walked up to an upperclassman and he asked you what language you wanted to take. And you gave him that answer and he wrote it down. And that was the language you took for 2 years. And so when I had planned to be an engineer, I had taken French in high school. And when I got to the front of the line, he said, well, mister, what language do you want to take? And I said, sir, I want to take French. He said, French is full. Pick another language. And so I looked at this list and it had the usual, it had Spanish, Portuguese, German, Latin, Chinese. And so I said, sir, I thought it was interesting. And I said, sir, I'd like to take Chinese. And he looked up at me and he looked down at that list and he said, it's too hard for you. Pick another language. And I got angry, as only a 17-year-old can get angry.
Excellent.
He didn't know me. I had an excellent record as a student in high school, and I resented the fact that he assumed that the language was too hard for me.
Yep.
I insisted. Long story short, I insisted. We went back and forth a couple of times, and I insisted on taking Chinese. And as it turned out, the Chinese My aspirations for an engineering career waned as I went through, and my grades didn't demonstrate an aptitude for that. But for some reason, I had an aptitude for Chinese.
There you go.
The next thing that happened that really set me on the path was I was studying, and those of you who have gone to West Point and know about military caddy curriculum, it's very rigorous. And I took a class on the politics and government of China from a gentleman named Colonel Gerald K. Osborne, who will always be my first and most important mentor. And the first A I got at West Point was in politics and government in China.
There you go.
And I wrote a paper, interestingly enough, and remember, this was the late 70s.
Sure.
I wrote a paper pointing out some of the reasons why the revolution in China in 1949 was successful. And it was a very, very frank, very honest paper. And Colonel Osborne was one of the first professors at West Point that said, you know, you might actually have a talent for this. It's a very good paper.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like most young people, when you inspire them and you tell them they do something good, they kind of stick with it. So those are kind of the events that set me on this path. And the rest, as they say, is my own personal history.
Right. Along the way of which you and I met one another at the Kennedy School, where you had another distinguished academic career with, among others, and his name came to mind when you talked about kinetics, mechanics, and metallurgy. I was struggling through the Lanchester equations with Bill Kaufman. Forgive us, this audience, but there's a rationale to sharing this with you. You were not struggling with those Lanchester equations, but if I may say it, and here's what I thought about when you mentioned that, we need some tell me if you agree, we need some Lanchester equations of information warfare. Right? Lanchester equations were great at measuring and the dynamics of kinetics. But we could use all of those you on the phone here trying to figure out what your PhD dissertation should be. What are the Lanchester equations of information warfare? That would help. Would you agree, General Hooper? Oh, I think he may be on freeze. So when he comes back, I will come back to him for an answer to that question. He's either on freeze or he's dodging my question. Barry, in this, there he is. Hoop, are you there? There you are. Okay. Good. Anyway, maybe we'll leave that little arcana to be for the time being and come back to DSCA. I appreciate, though, and I think the audience does, that, if you will, that story, humanization of our distinguished speaker. It'll help the many, many, many young people in this audience think about the perhaps longer term and unexpected, right, consequences of some decisions, some convictions, especially the convictions that you have even as a young person. Let me turn to COVID-19. A couple features of aspects, rather, really, of the COVID-19 crisis that I'm interested in, and I'll just pile them together. One is, how has the crisis affected the operations of DSCA? How are you accommodating that? And the other is, I alluded to it in my introductory remarks, are you anticipating or making plans for humanitarian assistance to allies who may, particularly in the developing world, I think, yet be coming to struggle through their response to the pandemic?
Well, thanks for that question, Steve. And the answer to your question is, certainly, like everyone else, we are adapting to mitigating the impacts of COVID-19 on our operations. We are assisted very much in some decisions we made early on. For example, a few years ago, we made a conscious decision to move away from desktop computers and even laptop computers towards tablet-style computers. So computers that can be readily moved from one place to another. And that was a conscious decision we made. So I like to say we've been telework ready since about 2016, 2017. So like many other institutions, we've gone to telework. we have been able to sustain operations despite working from home since early March. And I'm pleasantly surprised at the success that we've had. For years, Steve, as you know, across the government, we've discussed in a number of forums continuity of operations and things, remote working. And I think if there's one small silver lining in these clouds that currently envelop us, it's the fact that we finally had an opportunity to test this across the government and industry and the academic world, this concept of remotely working. So we've been able to do that. We are constantly assessing the impacts of COVID-19 on the global economy, and specifically on foreign military sales and security cooperation. I can't mitigate associated with global closing forward, as well as our ability to move forward during this difficult time. I'd say the biggest challenge that we face, and this is faced not only by us but by all of industry and most governments, is this issue of the interruptions to the global supply chain, and the expected inconsistencies in foreign government nations are essential. Some governments have declared that their defense industries and the associated transportation networks are essential. Some governments have not, and so we're dealing with those impacts. But on balance, I'd say I'm pleasantly surprised at how we've been able to continue to push forward and move forward U.S. security cooperation and foreign military sales, despite the impacts of COVID-19. Over to you.
Well, that's great and unsurprising in a certain respect. If there's anything you learn as a military officer, it is how to figure it out when Plan A is not working. Plan A almost never worked in my military career, just for the record. So I always had a B and a C. But let me come back and draw you back to the second half of my question. Humanitarian assistance plans. You got plans that you're working on, or for that matter, would humanitarian assistance in respect to the pandemic fit? Is that part of the mission, or am I reading too much in?
No, not at all. As you may know, and you talked a little bit about it in the introduction, DSCA has responsibility for managing the overseas disaster relief funding, or the ODACA funding, as it's colloquially known. And we've been working in conjunction with other organizations and agencies in the interagency to assist in efforts to provide relief to our allies, and working very closely with other agencies that have responsibility for this. For example, the State Department and other elements of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, to quite carefully balance domestic needs with the needs of our allies and partners. But we do have responsibility, for example, for managing some of the ODACA warehouses overseas. For example, there is one in Italy, right near our installations in Italy. We have been working with the combatant commands, for example, UCOM and others, on projects that are under a cap of $15,000, so very small scale projects. But for example, we were able to provide some equipment and some other useful things for example, the Italian government during the height of their crisis from those warehouses in Italy. So we have been working along with everyone else. Certainly, we're following the lead of those agencies that have preeminence in this sphere. But we are working to do that as well. Over to you.
Yeah, terrific. Let me bring you around to what I guess we, despite my insistence that everybody learn from this conversation that there is a broader mandate at DSCA than just FMS. Still, let me come back to FMS in particular. I would imagine a lot of the audience, and heck, even me, would appreciate an example of an FMS case so that we gain a more palpable sense of what people should be hearing or thinking when they read a headline in defense news that says, as I did this week, FMS case for such and such an allied country has been approved. If you could just run a thumbnail sketch of a typical FMS case, or maybe an extraordinary FMS case.
Okay. Well, no, let me give you a generic, I'd be happy to. Let me give you a generic sequence of events, very encapsulated sequence of events for an FMS case. First thing to understand about foreign military sales made by the United States is that
General Hooper, let me pause you a second. Sir, let me pause you a second while the network catches up with you.
My agency does not reside for me. My agency resides, and I work for the policy deliberations are long. They involve a number of disparate stakeholders, and they are very carefully acted on with a great deal of due diligence to determine the long-term second and third order effects of a policy decision. So I wanted to start off with that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is as opposed to, for example, our Russian counterpart, Rosenboron Export, which has a much different configuration, or the defense industries in China, the Poly Group, the North China Industries, and the equipment department of the PLA. So very, very, very different approach. So let's start at the beginning. The first thing that happens is, of course, is that a country raises or submits a request or expresses interest in an item, be it a fighter or a tank or something else. And so the first thing we do is there's a determination within the policy realms between the State Department, the National Security Council staff, many elements in the Department of Defense, the services and others, the COCOM. Is this something that we want to provide to this country? Okay, so that's the first thing. Okay, and so a deliberative policy process to determine whether or not that's something we want to provide. Following that, let's say that that's approved. It's a fighter plane and it's approved. So then the next step is
approved as a matter of foreign, almost really foreign policy, foreign and defense policy.
Absolutely, absolutely. The first step is always is this good policy?
Yep.
Okay. So always the first step. So once it's decided that it's good, and this is not the first check and balance. I'll go into that in a minute. So now that it's decided that it's good policy, the next step is the nuts and bolts of this and the business end of this. The country says, submits a request for pricing on how much are 10 fighter jets. Right. How much do they cost? And here are the things I want on them. Okay, and so they submit that, what we call a price and availability. Are they available, and what is the cost? And so then there's another round of due diligence when we look at what the country's actually asking for to determine is this technology or are these systems that we want to provide in conjunction with this particular item. Okay, and so there's another round of due diligence to determine that. Then there's a pricing of, okay, you said you want this. We've done due diligence. These are the systems, everything, let's say in this particular country, everything that they've asked for, we have no problem providing, both in terms of technology disclosure and in terms of systems. Then we price it out. And so then there's a determination as to whether, we return the pricing and availability to that country. And that first step, and they we can next step is for them to do a formal letter of request. Based upon that, DFA, working with the services and others, comes up with a package, okay, a total package that says, here is everything you're going to get. That includes training, sustainment.
Hey, Barry. I think we may have lost the general momentarily.
Can you hear me?
Oh, you're back, sir. Okay, good. Pick up right there.
Okay. So let me go through this a little bit quicker then. So the country has requested a contract. We put together a package. Then before that package is sent, and before we announce that package, so for example, before you read that the package has been offered in the newspaper, it has to be cleared by the Congress. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Are the committees of jurisdiction in foreign affairs? It has to be cleared by them. Okay.
Yep.
And so the Congress deliberates and looks at the package and determines that it is something that we want to move forward, looks at all of the policy staff work that's been done, and the Congress must approve moving forward with the package before it can go forward. And it is at that point that you see that the package is announced in the public that this is what we're going to do. The follow-on steps are, the final step is we come up with a contract, a real contract, and we work with the company, for example, that might be providing the equipment, whatever company's providing the fighter equipment.
Yep.
We come up with a contract. That contract is signed, and at that point, the company begins the process of manufacturing the equipment to provide it to the company. At the same time, we're putting in place training regimens. We're starting to train officers in English down at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. We're starting the process of education and training to ensure that when the equipment becomes available, the country will be able to sustain it, maintain it, and operate it. So that's the basic process. But the things to remember are, number one, it is a policy process. Number two, it involves a large number of diverse stakeholders in the U.S. government. In fact, we like to joke, it's called foreign military sales, but there's nothing military about it. It is an interagency process.
Yeah.
It's deliberative. It's interagency. And number three, the purpose is to serve policy objectives and not financial or other objectives. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, very good. Let me capture two details that I think sometimes go missed. That contract to which you described is a contract between the recipient nation and the U.S. government, as opposed to a contract, a commercial type contract between the nation and the company, right?
That is correct. In foreign military sales, that contract is between the country and the U.S. government. Now, there is another category, as you know, and that's direct commercial sale.
Yeah.
And in that case, that's an agreement directly between the country and the respective company.
Mm-hmm. And what are the, you've alluded to a couple of them, so this is almost a leading question, but why would a partner choose to procure a system that it's interested in through foreign military sales rather than as a direct commercial sale? There, for one thing, there's
Steve,
a lot wrapped around it, right?
I missed the beginning of the question. You cut out a little bit there. Could you ask again?
Yeah, sure. How do our partners decide between whether to pursue what they need through FMS or through direct commercial sale?
Okay, that is a decision. A maybe and military sales, and we for or against one of the other with the nation. It's a decision they make. However, there are some components, a lot of sensitive components and high technology equipment where it is mandated that it be sold through via foreign military sales. But the short answer to your question is that's a sovereign decision, and we generally don't interfere in that decision unless it is something that must be purchased through the foreign military sales process.
Yep. It certainly sounds like they get a lot of U.S. military support around a system. You talked about the training, language training, and other things through an FMS sale that doesn't necessarily, certainly could, but doesn't necessarily come along with a commercial sale. Okay. You and I are going to chit chat for another 7 minutes, and then I'm going to turn to Byron Callan to pull off and render to you some of what I'm told are some terrific questions coming across there. But I'm going to squeeze my last couple in something like a lightning round, if I may, sir. You know, you've alluded a couple times, or if I may just say it, you have an unusually in-depth and privileged position in two platforms of general interest to us. One is alliance relations, and the other is, as we call it, the interagency. So, in lightning round fashion, what's your ground truth of our alliance relations?
I think I will. Let me answer that very quickly in lightning round by saying this. The initial instructions that I received upon taking this position were we were to push forward and adhere to line of effort 2 in the National Defense Strategy, which is strengthening alliances and attracting new partners. That instruction that I received early on has been consistently reinforced by everyone, by my superiors, from the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy all the way up. It has never been, no one has ever issued any contravening instructions to the initial instructions I was given. So the answer to your question is, I am moving forward just as I have from day one to strengthen our alliances and attract new partners. And I'm very optimistic about both the work we've done and the status of our partnerships and alliances. And I would add that we're seeing actually an expansion. Not only are we sustaining and strengthening, because remember, people forget, this is a two-part line of effort. The first part is strengthening alliances and by extension partnerships. But the second part is attracting new partners.
Yeah.
Okay. And people often overlook that one. I would tell you that I've seen a strengthening of our existing alliances and relationships. And I'm proud to say that I've seen efforts by countries not normally aligned with the United States that are moving in our direction to align with us. So I've seen I've seen us attracting new partners. So I'm very optimistic about it. I think it's strong. And I think it's so strong that we're attracting new partners. And I'll stop there.
And how's the quality, let me use that characterization, of the interagency? I mean, God, your job, more than any that I can even think of, requires a day-to-day arm wrestle and embrace of the interagency. How's that rhythm?
I would tell you, and I say this in all honesty, because we have strategic alignment between the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, between the National Defense Strategy, between the Conventional Arms Transfer Policy. I have never seen better alignment in this particular realm in security cooperation in the interagency in all my years of work. We have a relationship with the National Security Council staff. We have a great relationship, a renewed and even strengthened relationship with our advocacy brothers in the Department of Commerce. We are constantly working with the combatant commands. Within my own sphere of the security cooperation enterprise, we've never had better relations with the individual services and the other implementing agencies, for example, the Missile Defense Agency. So I can say, and finally, and most importantly, we work closely with the Congress. We are in constant contact with the Congress, both committees and professional staff members, as well as the members. And I've never seen in all my time working in security cooperation better alignment and cooperation in the interagency.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze in my last question before turning to Byron to take some off of the Q&A queue, and it's about China. It's not your day-to-day concern, but as Barry suggested, you are one of our Pentagon's most preeminent experts in China. Here's my question. How do you think China comes out of the COVID crisis? I, just to voice my own opinion, feel like it's on a knife's edge. It could be enhanced. It could be diminished. What's your view of how the COVID crisis may affect the stature and standing of China in the world?
Well, and I would tell you that that's really two questions in a sense, Steve. The first question is, how will China itself emerge? In other words, from the perspective of the perception of the people towards their own government, from the perception of the health infrastructure in China and some of the internal challenges that the Chinese government faces. So that's the first question, and the jury's probably still out on that.
Yep.
Because we don't have at least in a public realm, we don't have direct visibility into how the people and how the Chinese medical authorities, what is their altered relationship with the Chinese government. So we'll have to keep an eye on that.
Watch that space.
There was some, as was the case in SARS almost 20 years ago. It was the Chinese medical community that first brought this to public light.
Yeah.
And there's that controversy there. The second issue that you're asking is, what will be the perceptions of the other global, the other nations of the world and globe with respect to their own perceptions of what China might or might not have done in revealing and mitigating this current COVID-19 pandemic. And I would say in this particular case, as in the previous case I described, we can see a lot of discussion going on back and forth across the globe, but we are still in the midst of this crisis. And so I'd say the jury is but those two questions are coming by the international community. And those are the two things we're going to have to watch.
Okay, I am now going to turn to Byron Callan. Byron, thanks again for helping me with this event. I understand you have a tall, impressive stack of questions from the audience that I'd like you to render to General Hooper in the last 15 minutes that we've got here. Thanks,
Sure.
Byron.
And of course, we're not going to be able to get to all the questions, General. I'm going to paraphrase some of these just in the interest of time. But our first question is from Frank Finelli of the Carlyle Group. And to paraphrase his question, Frank basically said, DSCA focuses on training and equipping partners primarily for conventional military challenges and threats, but what's changing to train and equip partners for non-traditional security threats, such as pandemics or cybersecurity?
Thanks, Mr. Finelli, for that very good question. The short answer to that question is, with every, we are an iterative, evolving organization. The answer to your question is, as we see emerging challenges in the defense realm, we are modifying and altering and making suggestions about regulatory and legislative changes we might want to do, making recommendations to our leadership to allow us to address non-traditional defensive challenges. For example, these pandemic. Another example is, as we look out in the Pacific Islands, the security needs of many of our Pacific Island partners are unique to them. For example, protection of fisheries, these types of things. So the answer to the question is, we are taking definitive, positive, proactive steps to ensure that we are on par with, and in fact, looking forward to emerging challenges to ensure that the definition of security cooperation remains relevant and on point in a rapidly evolving security environment.
Good. Okay, sir, and then we have a question from Major Wesley Riddle of the Georgia Army National Guard. He asked, General, you put heavy emphasis on partnerships and human-to-human relationships. To that end, can you address the value that you see in the state partnership program and where you see that program's growth future?
I am a huge, huge fan of the state partnership program. As someone who served as a J5 in the Africa Command, for example, a region where perhaps not as much emphasis, not as many resources as some of our other combatant commands, the state partnership program was absolutely essential in assisting our African partners in developing not only their military capabilities, but their institutional capacity capabilities as well. I've worked very closely with General Hokanson in his numerous roles, and I'm proud to say that I've been able to work very closely with the head of the National Guard Bureau, General Langell, who had my job in Egypt as the Bureau on it right now is I would welcome the assignment of more National Guard officers to the Defense Security Cooperation Agency. And we're working on it. We're working out the modalities of it, but I see them. The National DSCA, we can bring the state partnership program and traditional Title 10 security cooperation and Title 22 that much closer together so that our efforts may be synergistic and complementary. Over to you.
Okay, sir. We had a question from Robert at Johns Hopkins University, and he just wanted to ask, how is military cooperation going with Turkey, given all the controversy over the F-35 and the S-400?
Well, I mean, everybody has been following the controversies concerning our relationship with Turkey and their acquisition of the S-400. I could not possibly add to what is already in the public domain, but what I can say is what our leaders have said for a number of times. Turkey is a NATO partner. Clearly, their membership in NATO and the important role they play in NATO is something that we would love to see sustained. And so we continue to work with Turkey to both advise them of the ramifications of the S-400, and we continue to work with them in ways that we hope will continue to sustain and perhaps strengthen the relationship and get the relationship back on a track that will result in us continuing to move along and strengthen the long relationship we've had with Turkey.
Good. We had a question from Frank Kendall, the former Undersecretary of Defense for AT&L. And Frank asked, one issue for industry in working with close allies and non-US firms on new product development is the export control restrictions on sharing technical information early in development before there's an established program or record. Would you support a mechanism that would make it easier to accomplish this with our most trusted partners?
The short answer to Mr. Kendall's question is yes. We recognize that, my father used to say, recognition is the first step to redemption. You have to recognize you have a problem before you can solve it. We understand that exportability is an issue. We're working very closely with Undersecretary Lord's office, acquisition and sustainment, our colleagues over there, and in international cooperation and others, to work to integrate exportability earlier into the RD&A process. And I'd like to say that DSCA in the director's position is a very proactive, strong advocate for this exportability. So the answer to your question is yes. We already have some bodies that we've already constituted that DSCA is leading to ensure that exportability is integrated earlier into the process. And we're working very closely with Ms. Heidi Grand and the Defense Technology Security Agency as Heidi addresses these issues of ensuring that we begin to facilitate the evolution of our tech security processes so that we can continue to protect our vital and critical technologies while simultaneously ensuring that we have a process to vet these technologies and to release them in a timely fashion to ensure that we are competitive against our strategic competitors. So absolutely, Mr. Kendall, we're working on it. We recognize that it is an important issue. And there are a number of programs that are ongoing now where exportability and the process of exportability and rendering a program of record exportable is at the top of the priority list as we move through deliberations.
Good. And General, if I may, can I ask a question? Byron Callan with Capital Alpha Partners. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the Security Cooperation Workforce Certification Program that DSCA launched, I believe, in 2020. What are you hoping to achieve out of it? What should we watch over the next couple of years?
Oh, well, actually, you can start watching now.
Okay.
So we first, what we hope to establish is, and I will give you my vision. I'm a security cooperator, and I'm a very proud security cooperation practitioner. It is a unique discipline, no different than acquisition. And I'm old enough to remember when there was no acquisition corps. There was no Defense Acquisition University, and I had many friends who were involved in the establishment of the acquisition corps. Security cooperation is a well-defined, unique, and discrete profession that should be recognized, and we should train people from accession through mid-career to capstone to be security cooperators. And so the first thing we hope to accomplish, and we have accomplished, is as of the 1st of January of this year, we established the GS Security Cooperations career field. We did it ahead of the congressional mandate, and we've started slowly integrating people in, having them complete both the online and the resident requirements that will certify them in one of 5 career fields that we've established. So that's first. Second, you can't have a profession unless you have an underlying educational system to train and educate. So we established the Defense Security Cooperation University last fall. First defense university since Defense Acquisition University in 1991. We're very proud of that. We have Ms. Kara Abercrombie, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, is the president of our university. And we've established that university. We've established a curriculum, a sessions, mid-career, and capstone curriculum for our security cooperation professionals. So number one, we're going to have trained and educated career field professionals. And I use the term professional kind of loosely because they're the most professional group of people I've ever worked with. But what I mean now is we will have clearly defined security cooperation specialists, uniquely and discreetly educated and trained to do that job. And that's huge. And so what we multi-dollar enterprise.
Okay. This will be the
Next
last
question.
So it's from Liz Hammer, who's Secretary of the Air Force for International Affairs at Office. She's the country director for Belgium, Luxembourg, and NATO. And she asks, I would like to know what advice General Hooper has for what I'll call the next generation of FAOs and country directors who are now just entering the security cooperation enterprise. What are some of the lessons learned that he could share, and what hard challenges should we prepare ourselves to contend with?
That's a very, thank you for that question. That's a very good question. It's a good question for an old guy to answer. The first thing I tell you is never stop reading, never stop studying, never stop evolving. Our global security environment is evolving extraordinarily rapidly. As I said, we're moving from kinetics, mechanics, and metallurgy into the realm of information and networks. So number one, never stop reading, never stop studying. Number two, relationships are everything, whether in the interagency or with our international allies and partners. Relationships are everything. You have to develop and cultivate those relationships. And as I said, you have to continue to cultivate them over the long term. You know, as I said, there are many people I'm working with now that I have known both in the interagency and internationally since we were junior officers together. So you have to sustain and maintain those relationships. Number three, your country has the best military equipment and the best institutional knowledge and organization of any country in the world. Never forget that. And you don't have to apologize, be an apologist or excuse for anyone. And those that will tell you that, well, our strategic competitors are this or that, let me explain something. We have the advantage here. The only thing we need to do is recognize that and leverage that. The last thing I'll mention is what distinguishes us from our strategic competitors is embodied in those 4 values I talked about that the agency has. The fact that our processes are transparent. I've had many of my interlocutors who do business with our strategic competitors come back and say, I do business with them, but I trust you. okay? Values are important. Values matter. Respect for law, human rights, civilian casualty mitigation, the total package approach, the total spectrum approach, all of these things that differentiate us from our strategic competitors, we need to use that forcefully and aggressively. And if we do that, these things that distinguish us from our strategic competitors, we can and will be the preeminent security cooperation partner of choice on the planet. So don't doubt yourself, have confidence in yourself, have confidence in your country and its systems and our equipment, and there's nothing we can't accomplish. And I'll stop there.
Okay, that is where we all will have to stop. Byron, thanks very much for taking the wheel there, and thank you, General Hooper. This is really an example. Okay, this is an exemplary event in the Defense Industrial Policy series, and I appreciate it very, very much. I'm also going to, before we close, going to reiterate my gratitude to Barry Pavel and Byron Callan for helping me with the program, but also to Jamie Lawrence on your staff, General Hooper, and Christian Trotty on Barry's staff for being the guys who were instrumental to pulling this together. Not least, of course, thank you to the audience, the very large audience, which pleases me a lot to see. I think we've gotten, I think we have fulfilled the mandate that we advertised, and I hope the audience feels that way. And thanks to the audience who threw questions in. As always is the case, unfortunately, there wouldn't have been time for, no kidding, General, the couple dozen or 30 questions that Byron waded through to pull those 5 or 6 out. A last word, General Hooper, and I'll give it to you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all very much for inviting me here to talk to the council and to everyone out there. If you remember anything about anything I said, remember that our efforts, our uniquely American approach has been successful for the last 50, 60, 70 years and will continue to be successful going on into the future. I'm very confident of that, and I'm very proud to have been a part of it. I wish everybody out there and your family, we can't do anything if we don't stay safe and healthy. Always see you. Great to be working with you. You know, they say it's a small world, and it's getting smaller every day. So thank you very much. My best to everyone out there. Thank you.
All right, everybody stay safe. Thank you, General. Have a great day.